Welcome all, and thank you for joining today's ADABRI webinar. My name is Matt Holdstock, and I will be your webinar host today. In today's session, we'll hear about the findings and outcomes from a proof of concept project surrounding carbon emissions with a webinar titled Driving Decarbonisation, Smarter Carbon Reporting for the Australian Wine Industry. Before we start, I'd just like to acknowledge, in the spirit of reconciliation, that ADABRI acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and the community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Before we jump in and make a start, a couple of quick reminders for anyone who is new to the webinar platform. If you'd like to provide a comment or ask a question throughout, please click on the Q&A button on the Zoom toolbar, type in your question and click to send it through. We will hold a short Q&A session at the end of the presentations today. A reminder also that this presentation or this session is being recorded and a link will be sent through to you in the next 24 hours after the event. For anyone who's just joined, welcome. Today's webinar topic is Driving Decarbonisation, Smarter Carbon Reporting for the Australian Wine Industry. And in this session, we'll be hearing from a number of different presenters. And our first presenter today, who will set the scene for today and provide an oversight into this project and the topic, is the project lead, Anna Hooper. Anna is the Director of Economic and Environmental Policy at Australian Grape and Wine. Anna has worked in vineyard management and winemaking both in Australia and overseas, and has been a strong advocate for the importance of sustainable production. Anna's interest in sustainability has focused on efficient and meaningful approaches to reporting and managing performance. Alongside her roles in wine, she's been a non-executive director on a private and a government boards in the fields of conservation, biosecurity and natural resource management. So Anna, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Matt. And hi, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today. I'm going to talk about our project, which is a proof of concept project for carbon emissions tracing that we've just completed, thanks to a federal grant funding under the Building Trust in Agriculture, Australian Agriculture Traceability Credentials in Southeast Asia. The project involved a consortium of contributors, including Aswene, CSIRO, AWRI, Wine Australia, Amazon Web Services, More Than Machines, and the South Australian Government. And we've had much appreciated help as well from Hillsmith Family Estates, Treasury Wine Estates, Toll, Aurora, Monopole, Coles, and Systembolaget. We wanted to make carbon emissions reporting easier. We had a well-defined problem, and that is the emerging impost of emissions reporting and an impetus to help businesses to move away from having to manually request information from the supply chain partners and the partners' partners by providing a formal, trusted platform for sharing information that reduces the likelihood of multiple follow-ups for information at the same time as building trust. Our aim was to avoid creating a self-imposed compliance burden on the industry. So, to ask the question, why are we doing this? The answer shouldn't be we're doing this just for fun or just to be clever or just because we can, but rather to ensure that industry is well prepared for what is quickly coming down the pipeline and to develop our own processes for how to collect and share this information in a way that's efficient and consistently satisfies the collector of the data. So we worry a lot about inconsistent demands, but how can we argue for a consistent approach when one doesn't exist? So on that note, I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so a narrow window exists for Australian wine to be global leaders here. And I think that's really exciting. No global wine competitor has done what we've done. However, it has been done in other industries. So we have a first mover advantage in our ability to provide this data efficiently, and also we also have legal obligations coming at us. Domestically, we have large companies having to report through the Australian Sustainability Reporting Standards Board. And internationally, we have several jurisdictions, including the EU, with their own equivalent, and then we have the potential for a carbon border adjustment mechanism on the horizon, and Singapore, who we work with, also have 2029 reporting obligations looming. All of these require some degree of Scope 3 reporting. Now, small businesses are excluded from these obligations under the legislation. However, when they sell products to another entity, their products are that entity's Scope 3s. So your customer may decide that they want this information so they can report their scope 3s at a more granular level than simply relying on spend-based methods. We already reporting whole of business scope 1 and 2 through Sustainable Wine Growing Australia, but SWA isn't geared to calculate at a product level, and we know that retailers and wineries are increasingly interested in obtaining this information. Why can't we just estimate? Well, we can, and a common approach is to use spend-based methods, which calculate carbon by using dollars spent as a proxy rather than how a product was manufactured. Essentially, we do this because it's the easiest way at the moment, and the information can quickly be extracted from a general ledger. But just because something costs more doesn't necessarily mean it's more emissions intensive. So here's just a quick example. Imagine I'm making mushroom pasta. There's 3 ingredients: pasta, cream, and mushrooms. It's probably going to taste pretty bland, so don't write the recipe down. But this is just for argument's sake. The carbon emissions work out to be about 1.25 if we base it on dollars spent. Let's, on the other hand, say that I decide to instead use Alba truffles in the pasta instead of Swiss browns. Using the spend-based method, this brings the cost up 400-fold. And the overall emissions become quite ridiculously high to the extent that you could probably melt an iceberg with every bite taken. But as we all know, this is unlikely to be a fair or accurate comparison. And it's a pretty extreme example, right? But it does exemplify how using dollars spent can really lead to the overinflation of carbon estimates. And that's why one of the most exciting parts of this project was really learning about the e-liability approach to assigning carbon emissions to products, which Sal's going to talk about a little bit more, and it's based on activity-based costing. Rather than exchanging money as a building block to calculate financial costs of goods produced, we're exchanging actual calculated carbon, treating it not as an asset, but as a liability that links to the product as it passes down the chain. So doing it in this way not only uses real primary data rather than estimated emissions, but it seeks to eliminate the double counting of emissions, which is inherent in the GHG protocol, where multiple businesses may be accounting for the same emissions, or other emissions may be ignored completely, or worse still, people reduce their emissions by outsourcing carbon intensive activities if you really want to game the system. So I'm going to leave you to ponder that and pass over to Julian now, who's going to talk about product carbon footprints and how it's different and why it's become important in the retail world. And then Sal will explain how the PCF data exchange works, and hopefully you'll agree it's not only a better way of calculating carbon, but rather than basing it on dollars spent, but it's also a really good way for the value chain to collaborate to reduce emissions together.
Thanks, Anna. Our next presenter today is Julian Marchant. Julian is the ESG Program Manager for Wine Australia. Julian's career has focused on working with organisations spanning the agricultural supply chain, including direct engagement with farmers, investors, processors, value-add suppliers, and publicly listed organisations. Julian has assisted some of Australia's largest organisations to measure, reduce, report, and communicate their greenhouse gas emissions. In 2022, Julian led the team responsible for developing the Australian wine sector emissions reduction roadmap. Julian has pre-recorded his presentation today as he can't be with us, so I'll share this recording with you now.
Hello and welcome to the Carbon Traceability Platform webinar. My name is Julian Marchant. I am the ESG, Environmental Social Governance Program Manager at Wine Australia, and I'm going to provide a little bit of information in this webinar around product carbon footprints and how they're different from usual methods of calculating carbon emissions. Along the way, I also provide some examples of why this matters and what the markets are saying about product carbon footprints compared to other forms of carbon accounting, and how a product carbon footprint can really help those businesses that are taking extra steps to reduce their carbon footprint. So to understand a little bit around how carbon inventories or footprints, whatever you want to call them, are calculated, they take data that you have within your business or from the products that you're producing, and they times this information normally by an emissions factor. And that emissions factor, it may be relevant, it may have been produced within the last few years, it may be relevant to the jurisdiction that you're in, but it may also be not relevant. And so this presentation, I'll go into some of the methods that are used to look at activity-based costing and how it's different from a product level. So you can calculate a footprint for a product, you can calculate a footprint for a business, you can calculate a footprint for an event or a jurisdiction like a city or a suburb or a state. And this is all done based on the availability of data. So the great thing about a product level footprint is that it uses specific information taken about that product, and it gives a much more accurate picture of the carbon associated with that product than may occur through activity-based costings, which is very much the standard for calculating emissions associated with a business. So what's really important to know is that there are retailers out there, particularly the monopolies run through the Nordics and Canada, that do care about the carbon associated with your wine product. And this gives them an idea about where the high emissions products are coming from, and perhaps in the future, we don't know, this may be used to select one product over another. The other way that they're really choosing products based on carbon footprint is saying, we're not going to bother measuring your carbon footprint, but what we will do is require you to sell your product to us in lightweight bottles or alternative packaging. And this way we know that the packaging type that you're choosing is a lower carbon product. And so if you look at sending your wine into some of the Canadian monopolies or into the Nordic monopolies, you must be selling that for 750ml table wine in a glass bottle that is under 420 grams, and that is considered lightweight. The donut chart below very much shows a fairly typical breakdown of Scope 3 emissions. So for background, Scope 1 emissions are those direct emissions. So you turn on the engine within your diesel-powered tractor, and it pumps out emissions out the tailpipe. Those are Scope 1 emissions. Any emissions which arise through the over-application of fertiliser, that's another example of a Scope 1 emissions, as are refrigerants which may leak from any refrigeration systems you have in the winery. Scope 2 emissions arise from electricity purchase and consumption. And then Scope 3 is everything else in your supply chain. And the biggest section, or the section which has the most emissions associated with it for almost all business types, is purchase goods and services. And you can see in this example, 77% of the emissions are associated with purchase goods and services. This is typical unless you're running a mining operation or a purely agricultural operation or a forestry operation. For almost any other business, this profile that you're seeing is fairly typical. So a product carbon footprint is a bottom-up view. And so what does that mean? It means that throughout, as we add value to the wine product, how do we add value? We grow grapes, we convert those grapes into wine, we then bottle the wine typically, we package it, we put it onto a truck, and let's say that this wine is destined for overseas markets, so that truck goes to the port, it's then shipped to the market, and then it's taken to the retailer and sold to the consumer drinks the wine, and then that packaging type that the wine comes in can either be disposed of in a responsible manner, it could be recycled, it could be composted if that's possible, or it might just end up in landfill. And the way that it's treated through all of these processes and stages of its life determines its product carbon footprint. And so say you were wanting to understand as a retailer how much emissions are associated with a product that I've just bought over here, which is very similar to this other product, similar flavor profile, similar price point, grown in similar regions. How do I know that? Are they the same? Do they have the same amount of carbon in them? I don't know. And so there's a methodology you can use, which is the product carbon footprint methodology, to find this information out. And the way that you do this is, rather than relying on assumptions, you'd ask for specific information from everyone in the supply chain. And so, say you're the retailer, you might want information from supplier A, supplier B, supplier C, supplier D, supplier E, and supplier F to calculate the emissions associated with that wine that you're selling in your store. But let's say your supplier E, for example, and you want to know the emissions associated with a bladder of wine that you have on the back of your ship. You can also request that information from suppliers A, B, C, and D to calculate the emissions up until that point of that cargo that you're holding on your ship. And so this requires collaboration through the supply chain, but it also provides a really accurate method of capturing data and using this data to provide a carbon footprint of any product that you like. My presentation completed. I'll pass back to Anna and the team. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Our next presenter is Sao Sim. Sao Sim is the APAC Director of Product Solutions at Ozene, a global leader in cloud-based carbon accounting and reduction. In this role, Sao works extensively with companies from industries like oil and gas, building construction, manufacturing, supply chain, and agriculture. With over 20 years of experience spanning the US and APAC markets, Sao bridges the gap between technical innovation and commercial strategy. He is a veteran of both agile startups and large enterprises, including Microsoft, Skype, Reuters, and Hitachi. His expertise cuts across finance, industrial, LOT, telecommunications, and sustainability, and he specializes in leveraging data analytics and product development to drive strategy and regional growth in complex markets. So, Sal, if you're ready to make a start, I'll just ask if you could share your screen. And just pop your microphone on there.
Thanks a lot, Matt. How's that for the screen sharing? All good. Thank you. So I guess after hearing Julian's presentation on product carbon footprints, you might be wondering, with all the SKUs that you have, how can you possibly share this with your customers upon request? It'll be extremely time consuming, especially hard to organize if everything comes through via email. So to address this, ASWENE, along with the other wine industry bodies like Australia Grape and Wine, we undertook this challenge to build a world's first Australia Wine Carbon Exchange. It is a wine community-led network platform for securing product carbon data across the entire cross-industry wine supply chain. The key idea is quite simple. The Wine Carbon Exchange lets you publish your product carbon footprint into a central place easily. It allows you to connect with your suppliers and customers for you to request or share your product carbon footprint. And the idea is that you can then verify your own suppliers to make sure that they are bona fide, you have a commercial relationship with them, and your customers, that you have the right to share your product carbon footprints with them. The idea behind this is that if you publish your product carbon footprint to one central place once, you can reuse it many times over and over again and share it with your different customers. So let's take a peek at how this might work. After you register your account on the Wine Carbon Exchange, you can go to the connections page to invite your suppliers to join the platform to share with you their product carbon footprints for the products that you purchase. So if you are a winemaker, you could be inviting your grape growers, bottle manufacturers, etc. to join the platform and share their product carbon footprints for the products that you have purchased. We also included a bulk invite function in case your procurement team wants to get involved and they want to mass invite all your suppliers to provide their product carbon footprints. At the same time, you can see that in the Connect request page, your customers will appear here if they have requested from you your product carbon footprint to share with them. So through this, you can see which of your customers are waiting for you to share your product carbon footprint once you have completed calculating it. Now, the question you're going to ask next is, then how do we publish your product carbon footprints to the Wine Carbon Exchange easily? There are two ways. Either you key it directly into the exchange, or from your product carbon footprint software, if it's connected to the exchange, you can publish it directly to the exchange. Let's go through both of these methods. In the first method, in a direct entry, we provided a simple form for you to key in your product names, your SKUs, and you get to publish it onto the exchange. I want to highlight at this point in time that when it's published to the exchange, no one can see it at the moment. It's only when you're connected to a supplier, to your customer, that you can then share for them to see. So publishing it doesn't mean they can see it. Now, if you were publishing it from your product carbon footprint software, and this is integrated into the exchange, after you calculate your product carbon emissions, you'll be prompted with a screen that allows you to submit it to the Wine Carbon Exchange. And in this way, it flows smoothly and seamlessly with your activity when you're calculating your product carbon footprint. Now, I've talked a bit about sharing onto the exchange. I do want to emphasize this point. When you publish product carbon footprints into the exchange, the Wine Carbon Exchange only collects and shares your final product carbon footprint. No one can see what you bought, from which suppliers, or the purchase amount that you used to calculate your own product carbon footprint. Once the PCF is shared onto the Wine Carbon Exchange, you can then choose which partners that you want to share your product carbon footprint with. You can see in this screen that if you're sharing a particular product called test, you have the calculated emissions per unit, and you can select the partners that you want to share it with. Only when you go through this step will they be able to see your product carbon footprint. So you might be asking, why do you do this? And you do this because as a supplier, you want your customer to get the most accurate product carbon footprint. Now, before, if I'm a retailer in Singapore assessing my suppliers for their carbon footprints, I might assess a bottle of red wine coming from Australia with a very generic emissions factor and gotten the answer of 2.32 kg CO2e for the red wine coming from Australia to Singapore. But if I had my suppliers share directly their product carbon footprint, then we would be able to recognize low emission benefits like a green grid electricity in South Australia, or that you got a lower emissions from your glass bottle manufacturer. If you did that and you shared with me your product carbon footprint, in our exercise, one of the results showed that the bottle of Shiraz was only 1.1 kg of CO2e. It's more accurate, and in fact, it recognizes some of the decarbonisation efforts that went into producing the bottle. So in case if you're wondering if this idea is quite radical, I wanted to leave you with two assurances that you are not alone in this. Sharing product carbon footprint as the product moves through the supply chain is not new. And treating carbon like the cost of goods sourced from each supplier is also not new. These two ideas are backed by industry standards, such as the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, who gave us the GHG accounting protocol. They have championed a pact protocol that talks about sharing product carbon footprint across a data exchange. And in terms of treating carbon like cost of goods with the same financial accounting and auditable standard, we have the E-Liability Institute, who gave us activity-based financial accounting. And these two together currently have early adopters the automotive industry under the initiative called Katina X, and the chemicals industry under the initiative called Together for Sustainability. They are following this same process, albeit they are more matured because they have a few years head start, as we are, and they're taking this same journey to share product carbon footprint across the entire supply chain. So why would not the Australian wine industry take the lead too as well? Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Sal. Okay, our last presenter today is Andrew Skinner. Andrew is the founder and director of More Than Machines. Andrew has over 25 years experience in technology and 15 years in agriculture, and uniquely bridging deep domain expertise with cutting edge AI and data innovation. A former Chief Data Officer at Meat and Livestock Australia and leader of the National Scale Data Initiatives, Andrew has a proven track record of delivering strategies, data sets, and AI solutions that transform industries, making him one of the most qualified voices on the future of AI in agriculture. And I see you've already started sharing. That's great. If you can make a start, it's over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matt, and hello, everybody. Today, I want to talk about what we think makes a good data project using the carbon tracing project we managed alongside Australian Grape and Wine as an example. We see that there's lots of great data projects in agriculture, but we see that relatively few of them lead to lasting capability. And it's always intrigued us why. So we've been looking at this for a long time. And from our experiences and validated through the outcomes of this project, we think three things really matter. I'm going to walk you through some of the things that we found on this project. So we think from this project, a good data project starts with real outcomes rather than generic platforms or systems that can be used for many use cases. We spent a good deal of time making sure that our objective was very clear. And we wanted supply chains to collaborate to calculate defensible product carbon footprints that could support export and sustainability claims. We worked very hard to make sure that we kept to that scope throughout the project, and working with Sal and his team along with the other project providers, we really refocused in as one of our core principles. And that clarity shaped the whole project. It meant that we could work with real production data and real supply chain participants rather than using synthetic examples, because we were aligning to the problems that were already there in the data that was already being collected. It also meant that every data element that we requested had to justify itself. If a piece of data didn't contribute to the final carbon footprint or the outcomes that we wanted, we did not include it. And that discipline kept the project practical and grounded in industry needs. And it also really helped with our project governance. Because the outcome was real and the results were meaningful and easier to test, we were also able to demonstrate that the product carbon tracing is technically feasible within the wine industry. And importantly, we were able to have constructive conversations with and impact on international initiatives as well, which was a great outcome for the industry because it meant that we get a seat at the table. So second up is that we found that a good data project really uses real industry data. So the second characteristic of a good data project is that we work with industry data rather than idealized data sets. So on our project, from the beginning, we deliberately used data prepared for systems that producers already use. So these included systems like Sustainable Wine Growing Australia, operational production systems and ERP systems from across the supply chain, and other inputs where growers and other supply chain participants are already capturing data. And this was important because it meant we were testing real industry capability and not theoretical capability. We weren't sitting thinking, what is the best case scenario here? We were going in what's and all, and we weren't asking for additional effort or double entry. We also found that the e-liability methodology worked really well, and we were able to calculate product carbon footprints and exchange that information across the supply chain. We were also able to explore implicit auditing of that data coming from accounting systems. Because one of the great things about the liability system and its alignment with double entry accounting is that there's potential for the auditing that already happens through financial systems to be leveraged as well, increasing data quality. And that was a really great learning from the project. And also by using real industry data, it showed us exactly where industry capability needed to improve. So we're able to identify gaps in data definitions, inconsistencies between participants, and areas where the level of detail wasn't sufficient for traceability. And this was a really important outcome of the project, as it enabled us to find where industry data falls short and where the technology for carbon accounting is ahead of industry capability for capturing the data needed. And we think that's a really good sign of a good data project. Through the project, we worked really carefully to try and not hide the weaknesses of the system, and we revealed them clearly so that the industry knows what to improve and where to build onwards, and also find other activities for investment going forward from this project. Using production systems also meant that this wasn't a research exercise, it was grounding in systems already used. So we were leveraging investments that were already in place from the various project participants. The third area that we think really matters for a data project is that it aligns with the wider ecosystem. Data projects really struggle when they operate in isolation and everybody wants to reinvent the wheel. We see this happen time and time again. There's lots of great work that happens across the innovation system in Australian agriculture, but it's not necessarily leveraged by multiple projects. From the start, we wanted to establish working principles to align with other initiatives, working on standards, calculators, and data exchange. And that included initiatives such as the Australian Agriculture Traceability Protocol, the Australian Agriculture Sustainability Framework, and the Australian Agriculture Data Exchange work, and other projects that are helping define how agricultural data should be structured and shared. And we also consulted with other groups developing carbon calculators and other tools, including the Agriculture Innovation Australia Carbon Calculator tool. The project platform was designed to be calculator agnostic so that producers are not locked into a single tool. An alignment with calculator developers helped ensure that data structures could support multiple approaches and that we became aware of some of the challenges in consistency of results from the calculators and how to mitigate them. At the same time, as we focused on leveraging existing operational systems, such as Sustainable Wine Growing Australia, vineyard management systems, spray diaries, and winery ERP systems, so that we could make sure that the data that was already collected in the industry was easily funneled into the calculation process. We strongly believe that being a good data project enhances existing projects and infrastructure rather than trying to recreate or replace it. And that alignment gives the project a pathway to scale. And we're already seeing that in the future, where as some of the programs I mentioned, like the AusAg Data Exchange project, come online, we developed the project so that it can leverage those capabilities as they become available. So to close, what do we think makes a good data project based on what we did? And we think it would be three things. Start with a real outcome and keep it simple. Work with real industry data, not synthetic data and assumptions. Align with the systems and standards that already exist or that are being developed, and lift your head and build on what others are doing. And they sound simple, but they're often forgotten and blurred. Those principles allowed this project to produce results that industry can build on, and they are now shaping the next phase of the traceability work and carbon work in the wine sector. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrew. That was great. I just want to remind everyone, if anyone's got a question, just to pop it in the chat function down the bottom of the Zoom bar there and press enter. Before we sum up, I might just, there has been a couple of questions come through, so we might just address them before we go too much further. So One of the questions that come through is linked to labels. I'm not sure who can answer this one, but this one might be you, Anna. Is there any requirement for carbon footprint credentials to be placed on wine labels?
Thanks for the question. As yet, there's no formal requirement. However, we have seen some interest from retailers in being able to obtain that information. So, I mean, one might assume that down the track that might be of interest. I think consumers are looking for more meaningful sustainability data. So I think one might see the writing on the wall there.
Yeah. This one for you, Andrew. What does an ideal ecosystem look like?
Wow, that's big question. I think I think for me the ideal ecosystem is one where existing technology providers are driving the change um, into and aligning with the opportunities that are coming from this kind of research. I think an ecosystem that's being pushed by research is always going to have challenges. But I think if we can have an industry and provider led ecosystem, that's where the opportunity really lies, I think.
Okay, there's another one that's come through. I'll just read it out. How would your system be accessible from the importing end, like a government or industry access in the EU to satisfy their import requirements? Is that one you? That might be for you. Is that one you, Sal? I'm not sure.
I think Sal from a tech point of view, but I think from there's two sides to it. One is that they actually trust the data and how it's been obtained and calculated. So I think the first step there is to make sure that we're providing data in a way that's consistent with data that they might be receiving from other competitor products so that they're able to compare apples with apples from a tech point of view. Sal might have something to add.
Yeah, I think because of our compliance with the World Business Council's PAC framework and how we package the data together, their vision is that some of this data can be moved between different exchanges in different regions so that that data can be understood and shared if requested and approved. So a common data standard to share that data.
Yeah, I just add to what Sal said there, and as part of our final report, we've published the data specifications that we've used in the project, that hopefully can be built on into the future.
Okay. While we're talking about data, can the system be used to share other sustainable data?
Absolutely. I think there's been some requests when we worked with the stakeholders, the winemakers, the grape growers, to share other data. It wasn't in the initial specifications for this prototype, but yes, most certainly we can share other data as well.
Okay. There hasn't been any other questions come through, but I'll just remind everyone if they do want to send a question, they're more than happy to reach out and to any of the presenters today, and I'm sure they'll be able to answer your questions. So I might hand over to Anna to summarise, just to wrap up before we got a short video to play at the end that sort of summarises the project as well, which I think's be a great
Sorry, Matt,
watch.
I think there's one more question that just came in.
Sorry, there has too. Apologies for that. Okay, so there's been two questions. In this project, is this project in danger of creating more compliance and more work or cost for small businesses that can barely afford it? Is there a way to make it simple, easy, and good enough rather than just rather than being perfect? Who wants to tackle that one?
I'm happy to, because it's very close to my heart and something that I was very concerned about when we started the project, that we're actually creating a compliance burden upon ourselves that wasn't necessarily required. And I think we're seeing that this information is starting to be required, and by leading from the bottom up and doing it our way and creating a way where we can identify what some of the challenges are and provide some recommendations as to how we can deal with some of those challenges so that it's easier, more efficient, and that we're not collecting information for the sake of it, is something that is critically important in this. And that's why I think it's important for industry to lead.
Okay, there's another compliance one here as well. Common data standard sounds very good. from engagement with the EU or elsewhere, does an importing regulator want access to the data, or that compliance has been achieved? Who wants to tackle that one? So
I was going to say maybe Anna, you could talk to some of the conversations that we've been having into the
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I fully, I'm not sure if I'm answering the question correctly, but what I'm taking from that is that yes, we are getting, it's mostly the liquor authorities in the jurisdictions that have liquor authorities, and they have a much more stringent requirement for data. And I think it's because they can, because they don't compete with other retailers, and they tend to set the standard. And yes, we are seeing that. And in terms of compliance, compliance is required in different countries have different rules around what they have to report. At the moment, estimations are acceptable in most jurisdictions. However, we feel that it could change, and over time, the information will have to become more granular and more specific. Another thing that came up a lot in our conversations with System Belaga, who are trialing something very similar, was, how do we make sure that and this is speaking to that compliance question, how do we make sure that the information is reliable and accurate? And I don't necessarily know that that's an easy to solve challenge, but I think some of the things that we're doing within the project, such as trying to source the information directly from its source rather than through indirectly, I think things like that really add to the robustness of the data without necessarily requiring that it actually has a comprehensive third-party audit, until perhaps that's a compliance requirement.
Okay, and there's one more question here. Is the system now live, and is it being used by anyone as a question mark, or is there a timeline for going live? Is using the platform cost effective, I guess?
Yeah, the system currently is still in its prototype. It is live, meaning that we intend to allow people to get access to it. I think partly we do recognize that we had a very small stakeholder group as a starting point in order to design the solution. But it's being hosted by Australia Grape and Wine, and it will be live for people to give it a go.
We can put access to that in the follow-up email after the webinar.
Okay, and I think there's also a question around consultation. Is there an opportunity for consultation before it's implemented? Sales answering that one.
Well, I feel that because we spoke to everyone across the industry, not just the grape growers and the winemakers, but also the local freighting and international shipping and bottle makers, I think it's the first time you're doing it cross industry with so many participants. And every region is different, and I think there's going to be more opportunities to hear where the gaps are, because we don't really know everyone's different workflows and needs. So yes, definitely. And that's why we're in this engagement phase right now.
And I guess just to add to that, it's when if it's implemented, it's not going to become mandatory. This is something for people that want to use it. It's not, mandatory part of, even if it was to integrate with Sustainable Wine Growing Australia down the track, for instance, it's the vision is that it wouldn't become mandatory unless it was absolutely a requirement to be mandatory because it was a demand of the market. So we certainly won't be driving it.
Okay. All right. Anna, I might hand back to you to round up today. And then, like I said, we've got a short little video which I think summarizes the project really well, and we'll finish up on that.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so I just wanted to, kind of sum up with some reflections on the project. And first one probably is that we accepted that there's multiple challenges associated with any environmental reporting, from cost, time, defining the scope and boundaries, where do we start and stop, what's included and what's not, and how accurate do we need to be. We knew we couldn't solve all of these challenges, but at least that we would solve some of the challenges. We think we found a solution that offers strong potential to avoid the risk of us suffering multiple demands from multiple stakeholders that are inconsistent. So we knew that the issue of getting people to share this information would be challenging, and that people are inherently skeptical about why they're being asked to share data. And so it really became apparent that a huge part of this project was not so much about data and tech, but more about building trust in the industry as to what information should be shared, how to share it securely. And we certainly don't want small businesses to be coerced into sharing data for the sake of it, particularly when it's not material to the final product. So whilst we're really passionate about the project and the fact that we can now do this and we would encourage people to use it, it's not necessarily something that should become mandatory for industry unless it's mandatory in the jurisdiction to which you're supplying the product. However, that said, it's a very good way to actually identify where the carbon emissions are in your supply chain. And from a supplier perspective, it could potentially offer the benefits of being able to showcase that your product is superior in its sustainability to that of your competitors. So for me, one of the highlights of the project was building trust through a diverse value chain from transport providers to packaging providers, production, and that they could join the exchange and exchange information with each other in a more structured way. The trust isn't just about what happens to the information once it's sent into the exchange, but also ensuring that the receivers have faith in the data. So the social capital of being part of a data community really helped to build this trust. And this connection provided the mechanism for verifying identity of the data provided, thus introducing a level of accountability as well. The other highlight was the involvement with the e-Liability Institute. We are going to put some more videos up, which delve into this a little deeper, or some more training educational videos will be available that delve into this a little deeper, but it's a really interesting way of doing carbon accounting. So I really enjoyed learning about that. And also identifying some of the challenges. So one of them that I think was one that we kind of weren't quite ready for is that was seeing a parcel of wine that had thousands of different vineyard parcels in it. And I mean, you can imagine how that happens, a big volume, one that might have been in a tank for a while or barrel for a while. Throughout its aging process, it's had lots of blending and lots of topping, and it just keeps on getting bigger and bigger in its amount of parcels. So some of those challenges, it makes it quite hard to piece together a product carbon footprint, but we think a lot of these could be solved through interoperability with other systems such as LIP or even winery software. But also importantly, I think we need to accept that there may need to be other methods for estimating emissions, such as use of secondary data, and when primary data is unavailable or the cost of collection outweighs the benefit. There remains the challenge of how to audit the data, but as time goes on, we can potentially work with software program providers so that when we're collecting data, we're actually collecting it from its source at the first point of entry, and ideally those sources, like for an invoice, for instance, might already be audited or third party verified. So I think in time we can improve upon that. Then finally, the challenge of expecting multiple stakeholders to accept one methodology, which we touched on during the questions, and one platform, and to avoid multiple demands to use different platforms from different retailers, for instance. And that's where an industry-led solution such as this one becomes really exciting. So on the whole, we see this as providing benefits to the industry because it's led from the bottom up. And in doing so, we could have one method, one platform accepted by multiple users of the information. So one single data entry point for use multiple times, thereby keeping us ahead of the curve at the same time as shining a light on sustainable producers. So thanks everyone for their interest in our project, and happy to keep in touch. And now I'm going to hand back to Matt to provide to play you the little video.
We've been looking at decarbonisation for many years, probably seriously starting back in about 2005. You know, we want to get accurate information from our suppliers and also know the suppliers are on the same journey we are in terms of decarbonising.
In order to make meaningful carbon reduction, we really need to know what's happening across our whole value chain. To make a biggest impact, it's often happen upstream. Glass, packaging, transport, as well as growing grapes.
We can get green glass or green transport, and that's going to be important in the future for us to be able to get our carbon footprint lower on our products.
Recently, there's been the introduction of the sustainability reporting standards within Australia. This is impacting Australia's largest businesses, including Australia's largest wine producers. And what this means is that they need to legally disclose and report their carbon emissions. To do this, they're requesting information from their supply chain, including small-scale growers.
Looking ahead, green procurement is becoming business as usual, especially with our European retailers have increasingly relied on carbon data as part of the purchasing decision.
We're also seeing an increase in retailers requiring information from wineries. And what this really means is that some retailers will be asking wineries for their carbon information so that they can disclose this. The intention is to disclose this to their customers.
Having a platform, a centralized platform, allowing supplier like our growers, our contractor, processor, able to submit that information will be really helpful. And most of the time, they already submit this information elsewhere. For example, our growers and contractors, processor who are already part of the Sustainable Wine Growing Australia program have been submitting this sort of information on an annual basis.
I think with the tools we've got now, we know what percentage of each vineyard block goes into each wine bottle. So, we can track that. We should be able to track percentage of carbon that can go into that bottle as well, and we're not far away from being able to do that if we can pursue solutions through the software that we've already got.
So the whole idea for the project started with a conversation in Singapore with a tech solutions company and the South Australian government that came up with this idea of developing a secure data exchange for product carbon footprint that encompassed the whole value chain. We chose Aswane as a key supply chain partner because they were recognised for their expertise in data platform management and also ESG reporting. They'd also had experience working with the E-Liability Institute, and they'd had some involvement with Katina X, the automotive industry's project, which developed a world-first data sharing platform for product carbon footprints, similar to what we're doing here.
The fact that it's on one platform means that people can utilise that platform to retrieve data, and you don't have to keep putting data in different places, and so it makes it very efficient but also makes it very consistent, and that's what we want moving forward for our suppliers to be able to ensure that we're providing data that they trust. So we're looking at trying to get information specific to the products we're making, and if we can get that from our suppliers in a planned way that's available for us and easy to consume, so we can get that down to a product level, that's really important for us. We're selling different products in different markets, and we want to be able to provide those markets with the most accurate outlook of each product.
From a user point of view, that will actually help streamlining data collection and be more consistent and more trusted as well.
The problem with using industry averages or spend-based methods to obtain the data is it becomes secondary data, and that data really reflects the industry as a whole, and it fails to recognise the performance of individual businesses. What that does is it means that we fail to recognise high achievers, and also that we can't see that process of continuous improvement at that individual business level.
All of the suppliers are on a journey to provide that information to us, some more advanced than others. I think if we can get help and come together as an industry to talk to our suppliers about why this is important and how it's important for the future of the industry as well as selling our product, then the story will enable us to get more and more accurate data, and then once we've got accurate data, we can form plans as to what we do to fix the problem and reduce emissions.
Having a secure exchange platform allowing everyone submitting information into one centralized platform that will help streamline data collection process and then be more consistent. And yeah, that will be, I would say that from user perspective, that's really useful.
We didn't want growers to feel that they were putting the same information into this platform that they're already having to put into Sustainable Wine Growing Australia. So there's some sort of call for interoperability. This project really started as a data and tech project, but it really ended up being about establishing a trusted community data sharing platform. And that was one of the interesting findings, I think, is that you know, there's a whole lot of technical challenges, but really the big challenge is developing that trust in the community along the value chain to share, that you can share data in a way that's secure, trusted and reliable.
I think the benefits for the Australian wine industry are that we've identified that we need to reduce emissions through our wine supply chain, and we know that most emissions don't come from the vineyard or the winery. So this project is really about working with our broader supply chain, working with glass producers, transport providers to try and get an accurate picture of what our emissions are, but also drive down those emissions in order to maintain and increase market access.
As a greener suppliers, we actually position ourselves much better for the future.
Okay, that's all today. So look, thanks very much, Anna, Julian, Sal and Andrew for providing important insights into decarbonisation of the Australian wine industry. I'm sure everyone who attended today got a lot out of the session. I'd also like to thank the audience for logging in and taking part. And I'd like to remind you that, as always, you will receive a link to the recording of this presentation, which will be available on the Adabrise YouTube channel. Thank you again, and I look forward to seeing everyone at the next Adabrise seminar. Have a good day.
Thanks, Matt.